Over to you, Jeannie.
Keith has a ballad he would like to read for us. It is about an evening at the bar at South Beach Hotel in Young's Point. The ballad was written by Tom Junkin, a very talented resident of Lakefield. The era was late 50s to early 60s, at which time Tom worked as a waiter at the South Beach Hotel, and Bob Hill was on the till. The rest of the names are fictitious to protect the men who were out that night without their wives' permission.
Tom Junkin was my cousin. His mother was my grandfather's sister, so he was my second cousin. Sit over here, I'll buy the beer, and I'll tell you a story too. It's just a tale from the Oregon Trail, but I swear to God it's true. Now, Big Bob Hill was on the till, and I was working the floor. We'd had a few, like waiters do, 10 or 12 or more. Cam was there in his favorite chair. Mr. Norm was feeling light. Noisy Nora was in good form. It was just an average night. Jim and Fred and 3 or 4 more complained that the draft was bad, when through the door with an awful roar came a large and dangerous lad. Have you ever been to a place unseen where the proverbial pin was dropped? The silence screams and the whole world seems to suddenly come to a stop. He looked half dazed and his eyes were ablaze and his feet were out of line. He could hardly see and he looked to me like a walking case of wine. He kicked the door and roared and swore and yelled with all his might, "Set up the beers for me and my peers. The rifleman rides tonight." Now Big Bob Hill was on the job. There were no buts or ifs. He's 20 stones of skin and bones and 100 pounds of grit. With just one clout, Bob knocked him out and threw him out the door. But back he came with a man and saved and waded in for more. There was flailing, there was wailing. "Give it to him," someone cried. Then they struggled and they juggled, till they both fell down outside. He lay so still, he said to Hill, "I swear to God the Lord, when I get through with my 22, you will look like a cribbage board." Now late at night by the caution light near the bridge out to Young's Point, there's a man out there with a murderous stare, and his ego is way out of joint. From 12 to 1, he oils his gun, and he sits there all alone. What he doesn't know, but I'll swear it so, Bob Hill takes the long way home.
Keith, to begin with, why don't you tell us when and where you were born and when you moved to Lakefield?
I was born in Buckhorn on December the 28th, 1928. It'll soon be 79 years ago. I was named after Roddy Miller and Keith Blewett. And the year before I was born, Roddy fell downstairs and I think he broke his neck, but he died. Keith Blewett was my cousin, and another cousin, Moss Montgomery, shot him. So I'm well named. Take your chances. We moved to Lakefield shortly after the new year, that year, and lived in the apartment that Jack Milledge lives in. Dad worked for David Miller, the barber, was the father of Roddy, and they lived in the house right next door to the Baptist church. I'm like the guy that got the pills for the Alzheimer's, and he was telling me they were really done. So what were their names, Doug? geez, I forgot. There was 4 in my family. Morley, was called Mouse. Dave, named after my grandfather, was called Yai because he couldn't talk very good. And the kid down the street was a foster kid, and his name was Jerry, and he couldn't talk too good, and I'm telling you, it was never nice to listen to the conversation. He called himself Jerry, old boy, ha ha. And we lived there and we started to school, to the Lakefield school, and things were tough. We didn't even have cotton to go and pick like Johnny Cash. we were looked, and I didn't realize we were as poor as we were until I started to have to eat my cereal with the forks, or there'd be milk for the other kids there when they were. But school was a big deal. Even the kids on the far side of the bridge, right to out to where the store is out there now, went home for dinner. And those big yellow things, none of those. Of course, we didn't pay any taxes either. That was a good sign. But we were raised as kids. All the kids were the same. The biggest entertainment that we had, if you didn't have a hoop and tee, you didn't have nothing. And a hoop and tee, I don't know whether you know what a hoop and tee is. It's a wheel off a baby carriage or something, and a piece of hockey stick about that long and one about that long on the end of it, and you wheeled it around. And it was bad business if you didn't have shoes. The pavement, and would just carve your toes up, and then you couldn't wear a shoe. Dad worked for Webster for quite a few years, and then he went with Frank Coyle and worked with Frank. He drove truck for Frank. He was one of Frank's first drivers. He had truck drivers before, but they had their own truck there. But Dad worked for Frank for a long time. And it sure helped working for Frank and going back in the mines, because we were never without meat. There was more meat cut on that workbench in Coyle's garage than there was at the butcher shop with Alec Hall or Teddy Crawford, either one of them. We never knew it. I don't know, I think we made some kind of a deal with the farmers down in Duro there for the potatoes. There was lots of meat and potatoes when we were growing, and it all showed. I had a young sister who died when she was 2.5 from a case of appendicitis, ruptured appendix. And of course, they didn't have the antibiotics they have now, and they didn't have the knowledge to know what it was. If they might have had the knowledge, but they didn't let on. Where do you want me to go from here, Jeannie?
Who was the doctor?
Hey?
Who was the doctor?
Well, there was only 2 doctors in town at that time, Dr. Alec Fraser and Dr. Kennedy. And he was a vet. And he was the best of the 2. Oh yeah, Morley. We used to, I should maybe tell you, we moved from there when Dad went to work for Coyle, and we lived in the little house that they just fixed up right behind the Trent Canal shed over there. And that house was behind the Catholic Church in Lakefield, and brought over Charlie Tanner, who was the optometrist here. C. Tanner and C. Better, of course. It was brought over on the barge. We lived there for quite a few years, and they were entertaining years, because with Dad working for Coyle, in the wintertime, he'd come right straight down, I think that's Charlotte Street there by the Home Hardware and the clinic. He'd come right straight down there, and supper all on. Mother always had supper ready, and if Dad wasn't home, well, we all got our chairs and went to the window for the show. And he'd be coming down that road towards the lake. And he'd be just running her right from one edge to the other sidewalk. And then when couldn't hear him squeal the heels when he went around the corner there in front of Jimi Hendrix because of the snow in the wintertime. He'd cross the dam and still weaving. And I think the guard gate that they had up for the Trent Canal, where they drained the one side, it had to be that wide. And he'd eyeball that for a minute or so, and he'd jump down on her, and you think he was a high wire walker when he But he remembered his mission, because he was just a good weaver. When he went, he always ate a good meal. Always. And we moved from there, bought the house right beside the Lockmaster, up on, I think it's Caroline Street. And real estate was good that year, Eileen. They bought that house for $850. And they went to Clary Duff and got the mortgage, all of it. And when we were there, we all of a sudden, when we went to the other house, we went from the Blowhards to a Kentucky. Everybody that lived on this side of the bridge was Blowhard. And the other side of the bridge was Kentucky's. Now that's what Tommy Chaplin said, whether you could believe him or not. And he was the principal. But in the summertime, what a blessing. You go and you rip and rain all over the country and go back. And Brother Mouse, he had more nerve than dictation. We'd go down to the locks, and the locks would be down, waiting for a boat to come in. And he would dive from the one side down into there, and he'd come up right at the ladder. I was scared to jump in case I'd hit the other wall. But not him. He had the nerve, I'm telling you. And
This was the empty lot.
well, there was water at the bottom, but it was
Well, I
about
know, it was
28
only
or
5
30
feet
feet
deep.
down. But Morley, Mouse, joined the Navy. And when they were in the Mediterranean on a cruise, it was after the war, right? And they just cruised around in the Magnificent, the aircraft carrier that Canada had. And they got, somebody on the ship got polio. And they found it when they were ashore, so they quarantined the boat, the whole boat. And 1,200 people of a crew on that boat. And he was the only one of the 1,200 that would dive off the flight deck into the Mediterranean. They used to have a crane down here when the tug came down, the naphthalene tug, and they would unload it, put it in a big pile, and then put it in cars, box cars, and tow it away. Eric Holmes run the crane there, and he used to get Mouse there, and Mouse would only do it. He didn't buy cigarettes, but he smoked them. And Eric would give him a cigarette, and he'd sit there and puff on it until it got down short, and then he'd get in the bucket, and Eric could take him up and swing him out over the water. He'd dive off that bucket down there and come up, and he'd put the cigarette back in until he'd come back up, and first thing you saw was a puff of smoke. Yeah, well, he was, as I say, he had more nerve than Dick Tracy. Yeah. Well, here's a thing she wants me to. I told you about the hoop and tube tea and skinny dipping in the locks. But I used to pick up Pearl Peacock, had the hotel there, and she didn't have a whole lot of tenants, but she had enough chickens at the back to keep them in eggs anyway. And I used to go get a box and a sickle and go out and cut grass for her to bring back to feed the hens. Organic, you see, for organic eggs. And omega-3 too, but they didn't have a name for it. And one day I took the dog with me, And oh, she had a beautiful big German Shepherd, I guess they call them. Oh, big lassie dog anyway. And the grass was pretty scarce that day, and I had to go right up to Reg Stout's up at the old Strickland place, and I was looking around there and I lost the dog. Well, then I started looking for the dog and went over to the Glenwood Farms, and Gib McGowan and somebody else, McGowan just run the farm there, and somebody else, I don't know who the other guy was offhand, they got the shears, the electric shears, and they shaved that dog to look like a lion, and you could hear almost the roar. It was so real, the ball and the tail. I got back, and I don't know, well, it was, Pearl was going to go up and kill those two guys if they found out who done it or me, and I didn't know which way to go. So finally it blew over. It blew over. And anybody, I can't see anybody, oh, there's a few of them around here that's smileys, that used to go into Peacock's Hotel. And the first thing that you saw when you went in there was old Billy, the cap on, and he'd be sitting there, and, what do you want? What do you want? That's the only, I've never heard him speak any other word. What do you want? Money, he wanted the money. But what do you want? I think Pearl was glad when he left. He went up. I think he went up. Well, he only said the two words. He'd sure get a good recommendation. Yes. And just in passing, I'll mention, when I mentioned the Strickland place up there, I had two aunts that worked there as kids. And one worked in the kitchen and the other one was a housekeeper there. Millie Stockdale and Bertha Hiskett. Millie was married at that time. And no, Millie married. She married a Wilmot Stockdale in Buckhorn, and they moved up into the house. I think about 4 from the restaurant up towards the old Strickland place there.
Who were they working for?
Strickland's.
Okay, thank you.
They get cash when they from Strickland's. Can you remember that, Michael?
No, I don't get here until 1947.
Oh, you were late comer. As a matter of fact, he lived in my great-grandfather's house. At one time, it was down right where the canal was dug, and they moved 2 houses out of there. And the big house started to fall apart, so they just moved it off into the corner, and it's still there, and that's where Bob Webster lived. He was the police chief here for, well, until he straightened the Graham family and a few of those big families out anyway. He was rough and tough. And then, I know the other day I had a memory when I went into the bulk food store down there. And if you, next time you go in there, if you ever do, look at the door, the thumb door handle, the latch. I can remember when I was a kid having to reach up to put that, and the latch is still there, the same latch.
It
Yeah.
doesn't work very well anymore. But
It is a little loose, but they have they've got a guy inside with a gun too, like. Oh, and I'd like to mention, there's several here that would back me on this. In grade 8 at the old school up here, there was a box about the size of that bulletin board there, and it was full of Indian artifacts and natives. Sorry, that's how we're going to do. I never played cowboys and natives. I don't know what we do. They were good people. They never got mad at us. But that disappeared with the school. And it was beautiful. It had peace pipes, and the bowls were carved out of limestone. and hatchets, tomahawks, hammers, skinning, all kinds of stuff. And I don't know, can you remember that, Royden?
I cannot.
Well, Royden's dad, Royden and Neil's father, was the caretaker at the school at that time, and he said, Monty, take it. And I said, oh, said, I'm not ready for jail yet. Something. He said, somebody's going to get it, and somebody got it. It went. And it was there's beautiful stuff in there. So that's my next duty, is to find out where that thing is. Yeah.
Where was that, upstairs or down the basement?
In grade 8, right at the facing the west wall.
What were you
Can
doing
you-
up there?
Pardon?
What were you doing up there?
Well, I had 2 brothers. They asked me if I wanted to see them. The only time I saw them was at bedtime and at school. I knew there'd be somebody here. Heckler. Yes.
Excuse me. Keith, I think at that point in grade 8, I believe you and I were in the same grade at the same time, and I think Charlie Beckel was the caretaker at that time.
When we were in grade 8,
Yes.
yeah, but this was when the school was going.
Oh,
When they took the school away, and your dad was there then. But there was no classes at that time. He told me. Somebody told me one time it was up near Kobekonk. So I done an inventory there on the clerks, and I saw who's up around there from this era and area. But they were beautiful. You would have to see them. The only place I've ever seen anything like it is in Cliff's basement there underneath the showroom. And it's real stuff, real stuff. Oh, and I worked for Clarence Coons at Glenwood Farm. And then the only way you could get the milk up at that time was they took the rumble seat out of his 34 Plymouth, put the cans in there, and they took them to the Grove School. It's just, all healthy people drinking whole milk. Still can't figure that out, but they all were. And I had to go and get my driver's license. And I was only 14. And they sent me to Toronto to get my driver's license. And I remember the furthest away from home I was at Barry's garage there at the 5 Mile turn just out of Peterborough. But I made her, and sat there and waited for my turn to come up. The guy come out with me in flat tire. Well, he wasn't waiting. He come back and I'd be the first one in the morning. So I slept in the car. I couldn't go to a payphone because they never used one. We didn't have a phone at home, and I didn't know how to use the phone, and I might not have had the nickel to use with it. But I did. I had money for Clarence looked after me that way. But he took me the next morning, and I got home, and Mother was sort of getting a bit worried. But I stayed out lots of times when I was 14. I'd been gone for the weekend sometimes.
I know you won't want to refer to yourself as this, but your friends tell us you were known for your speed and your attitude in hockey. So could you tell us a bit about your wonderful hockey career?
Well, I was fast and had a mean streak. That'll be about the putting her down. Had a mean streak. And loved it. But I didn't do it at 8 years old. 8 years old, you get on TV. In 1947, that's the first trophy that I ever won. And that was for the gents speed skating. And they used to have a carnival here in the wintertime, and it was not bad. This was during the war. Too many people couldn't travel far, really. Nobody had any tires, only Frank Coyle. And our hockey, I can't think of the first coach we had. Cy Hopkins sort of organized it, and the fellow that was the coach had played for the Montreal Maroons. And he was brought down from Timmins to work at the research, and I think he was about the first one ever brought down there, and he worked in the old cement office. And about halfway through the season, he was gone, and I forget.
Chuck Brannigan.
Chuck Brannigan, thank you, Neil. He's not critical all the time. That was him. Chuck Brannigan was the guy, Neil. And we had a good team because we had an arena, if you could call it that. But all the guys, the good hockey players, came up from Peterborough. Vern Marshall, Arnie Dugan, Red Sullivan, Tony Giardino, Kenny Withers, Kenny Anderson, and most of these lads went up with the Odd Fellows the next year. The Odd Fellows called them the Triple Links, which was their signature, and we had a pretty good team. We went right to Varsity Stadium in Toronto, and I can remember the game up there. We were defeated. And the old rink in Lakefield was something else. Scrapers got in free, so there never was a shortage of scrapers down there. And they weren't the only ones that got in free. Before they turned the lights on, there was a lot of hoisting the guys in the snow holes. There was 2 snow holes there on the west side of the rink. And we used to hoist them up and get them in there, and they've been known to pull them right up with the rope right to the front door up into the dressing room upstairs. Oh, anything to do, get in. They were pretty good there. George Pearson, Dave Charlton, those lads that looked after the rink, they knew the ones that wouldn't cause any trouble. They let you in. And another way to get in was carry the pop and the wieners up for Elmer Graham or Herb Brown, and you get in free. The booth managers. Sliver Hamlin, I can remember one time there was a big fight right down at the goaltender, and this place was like Air Canada place there, and the old arena down there had balconies. Oh, she was big time. And the only teams that ever played down there were the Curve Lake Indians, and they played against Gill's Greyhounds. And Gill's were the butchers that were out there where the florist is now. And Gill's Greyhounds and the Curve Lake boys. And there wasn't too many boys out at Curve Lake during the war either that could play, but there was a few of them there, and they used to have rough and tough, I'll
If
tell
they
you.
could afford skates.
Well, they used to come in and borrow us, from us kids in town, they'd borrow skates from us. And Joe Blewett, I can remember the first time he took me down, and I wasn't very old. I don't know how old I'd be. I know I wasn't old enough to get on the ice. I was the first ever time I had to warm the bench, as they say. But it was in the Brock Arena. And then the next year, I played a couple of games for them out at Omini. And that was before I went to play junior. And we played, our best hockey was played out on the marsh. Evie Dunford's lads had a buckboard, and we used to go around and gather it up. Some nights I know that they used to go up the laneways and get the wood off the wood pile of the people who lived close to the marsh out there and take it out for the fires. But boy, we had big fires, and at that time they didn't open and close the locks and the dam. The water was just bottled. If you wanted to flood it, you had to cut a hole in ice and bail it out. And the one day I was down at that guard gate this wide. We were sitting there in the canal, everything was frozen, just beautiful. And there was a lad there, Tucky McFadden, Bernard McFadden, they lived right at the bridge, or up the locks there, the McFaddens, they were a big family. And Tucky and I said, well, let's go for a skate. And we skated from there to Crow's Landing. It was just like that tabletop, and you could see down in through all the weeds growing. It was really something. And coming back, we'd have never made it back. Our legs were so sore. There was little ripples there, and oh boy, we were numb right in there to the knees. But the wind came up, and the wind took us right down from the top end of Stony Lake, right down through Clear Lake. So we had to walk across at Jones Point to get going.
You remember the year?
No, I don't remember. Well, I could find out very easily because Bernie left that weekend, he went, and I've been told that he never landed in England. He went right to the battlefields, and he was one of the boys that didn't go back. Tucky McFadden, and he probably picked up the name from Tommy Chaplin, who this arena over here should be named after, is Tommy Chaplin. If people knew him, like I remember him, he'd bring the sweater to you. You never knew you were going to play until he said that you were going to play, and you weren't acting up that day at school or something. And you only got a penalty up at school. You didn't get any down at the rink. But Tommy'd sit there, give you the work to do, and he'd sit and mend the sweaters up there and the socks. And when he got one done, he'd bring it down and he'd tuck it in the side. See you down there. See you down there. And the road trips with his old 31 Chev. We used to get road trips, and my goodness, they went to Young's Point and Warsaw. Big time. Big time. Yeah. The only, we won here, the hockey, going back to the hockey days, we won the intermediate loop around here several times. And the furthest we got was to Sunbridge, I think, and they won it that year. They won the Ontario Championship, and we had played them. They put us at Sunbridge. But you go from Sunbridge here to Sunbridge in a horse and cutter, and my God, you don't feel much like playing hockey. I think it was a horse and cutter. No, it was an Oldsmobile. But I left here and went down to Belleville for 3 years, and while I was there, we had a lot of spare time, and I started to work on the cranes and shovel fronts that were then, and eventually got to the cranes and backhoes and through the years, and I worked then for McFarland after we won the Allen Cup in 1958-59, that's Senior A hockey in Kelowna, and we were the first team that ever come back from a 3-0. They had us down 3-0, and we come back and beat them, which was satisfaction. And some of these pictures, there's our team right here, and that's a picture in the dressing room after with holding the cup. And one lad holding the cup on the right-hand side, looking at it, his son is Mark Crawford. His name is Floyd, and he's Mark, that was the coach of the Canucks for quite a few years. And I think, Neil, who's he with? Los Angeles, yeah. Just Los Angeles now. Came back, we played old-timers here for quite a while. Lakefield had a good team, the old-timers. They were all honest, and then, got short of players a bit, and we brought 2 or 3 lads in from Peterborough and never won anything again. That ended it right there. Our salary cap was bad.
Hometown proud.
That's right. A thing I jotted down here was, this at one time, they tell me, was the only town in the province of Ontario that owned all the waterfront going through the town. And that would really be an asset. But I started in 1927 to find as many as I could. And I found 22 people had drowned. And you know, that's from 27. And then here about 2 weeks ago, I was looking and found 4 more that had drowned. 2 loggers and 2 canoers had drowned right out here. And of course, at that time, the water didn't go down over the locks. It came over and stopped at the school and went down towards the powerhouse there, down by the lumber yard now, and the liquor store. It just washed it right away. Nobody drinks with water anymore. And some of the, as a matter of fact, the girls here, they had an uncle, Leo, drowned, one of the 22. Yeah, and there was, I don't know how many people in town. Everybody was a character. It was really something. Tiny Hill had the little store across the bridge where I used to have the snack bar in the later years. And I'm not sure, but I think Elmer was his delivery boy. Now that's a long time ago. And I can remember them sitting in there in tomato season by the bin where the brown sugar was. And we'd be putting the brown sugar on the slices of tomatoes, testing them before they sold them. What do you call you, Bill? Bill. Yeah, and all these Grahams have a name, and I think Tommy Champlin was responsible for most of the names. I don't know how. Wesley, I guess, was or Theodore, red. Theodore was red. Norman was Shiner. They had a name for Wesley too.
Nigger.
Oh, yeah, I told you I wasn't going to say that. And Elmer was Nobby, and Beverly was Sweeney, still is, doesn't change, never changes, Sweeney. And Mutt was Arnold. We got them all in. And Tiny, one time a guy went in to Tiny and tried to sell him some wood. And my God, he said, no, he said, I couldn't buy any wood from him. He said, I got so much wood over there at the house that the wife's burning it. Another lady come in and says, Mr. Hill, how many times do you suppose that pendulum has swung back and forth in that big clock up there? Well, he said, I don't know just how many times, but he said, I know the shadow on it has wore the wallpaper right off. Another, Brigham Young, he was of the same era. Brigham Young. Fred, he was quite a lad. I remember him telling me one time about a cat he had. A beautiful cat. And he said, you couldn't train it. He said, somebody got it before me and trained it because he said it'd go in the same place every time right at the end of the hall. And we had, if you know where Brigham lived over here on Concession, they had the front door, and it was quite well, they didn't call it a deck then, they called it a porch or a veranda, all the houses had. And he kept that cat, trying to train it. grab it at the door. It'd always go at the door and want out after it's done the mess. He'd take it down and he'd wish, wash, wish, and take it to the front. He'd just pitch it as far as he could throw it. He'd done that and done that, and he said, this has gotta end. I go, one day he went and the cat sitting at the door meowing, and he looked down in the hall. It was there, and he went to grab the cat. The cat run down, rolled and rolled and rolled in it, and run out and jumped off the veranda there. So Tiny said, I have enough of that cat. He took it down, he threw it, put a brick in a bag, and put the cat in the bag. It gets better. He took it down to the coal dock, and he dusted it out as far as he could. Get up in the morning and out the back kitchen, and he looked at the screen door, and he said, there was that cat. So right then, he said, I'll fix the thing right smartly. He grabbed the cat, took it out, cut its head off, put it back in the bag with the brick, and down, and he dusted it out again. I go, the next morning you hear. He went to the back door, and there was that darn cat scratching the screen, and it was standing there with its head in its mouth. Am I going too fast? Who else have I got on here? Billy Henderhand. Billy Henderhand, puppy dog, they used to call him, and puppy dog chased every kid that ever was born in his area in town, and tried to put them in a bag and take them out to the farm to help him. And he lived in the stable. I'm sure it was that was all that was left of the barn, and the barn burnt, and he lived in the stable in the field right next to Leahy's, where Leahy's house is now. And he was harmless, Billy, but he chased the women. The women were scared of him, and the women and the kids were just scared to death. And there was an old lad, his name was Billy Larvey, and he was out at the county home. And he had got caught up in a chainsaw, or a sawmill, and had cut both his legs off about 6 inches below the knee. And he went around with shanty boots, and if you don't know what shanty boots were, they were the ankle boots, all rubber, that the poor kids wore. And the rich kids wore it, they had felt sides on them, they were a little warmer. But Billy Larvey would put them over his knee, at the back up here, and the laces across, and he would walk from that county home into town on his knees. Now, I know he always was looking for a ride home, but he was the nicest old guy you'd ever meet. Billy, and yes, and then my good friend, Hilliard Crow. He has several relatives here. He was more commonly known as Rusty. This little box is made of sumac. And there's no nails, no nothing. Everything is all fit in. And the work that he could do was just fantastic. I see some girl, oh, that's just Patricia, she's seen this before. You can see the box. And he was just, I don't know what you'd say, he could do anything. He was real master craftsman. Now, this was back in the days when there were no drills and tools like that. This is all done with a jackknife.
Wow.
That's basswood. Pass it around there, but take a look at this. You have to see this before you.
Oh my God.
These are swivels. Double swivel that in that one, and these two rings float free on there and done with the jackknife. That was in 1935. He was, yeah, look at the little chains and the little balls that roll up and down in the thing. Yeah, I can just give it to them and pass it around. He also, he made one time, he made a lot of them on a piece of shim stock. He cut a nickel in half and soldered it, silver soldered it onto the piece of shim stock. And you could go into those slot machines, the money machine, and lay it on the top and push it in and bring it back out, and you get a game every time. Yeah. Save your nickels. Save your nickels. But Rusty not only was a craftsman this way, he made a table. Mrs. Fred Brown, had a desk with a folding thing, top on it, and it showed the desk. When you raised the top, you could see the desk platform on here. And he done flowers, inlaid flowers in the corner of that desk. And a lady told me one time, she said, "That's so real you can smell the flowers." Oh, he was good. He was good. I think the ministry of natural resources paid him on the side, because he would, when they brought a new man in, a new game warden, they'd say, "Okay, here's your duty. Go and catch Rusty." He's still going. And nobody got near him. And I can remember Rusty taking me hunting and one time, and I don't know what was the matter with him, whether he had to work during the hunt or not, but he very seldom hunted during the hunt. I think he was afraid of getting shot. But he'd walk up the road, and he'd walk up the road like this. "Yeah, we'll go in here." "Okay, but you didn't walk in there. You went this way." And the game warden thought you were coming out. You didn't throw Hilliard. But his nephew gave me this box and the chain and the thing, and 2 or 3, he gave me a miter box, and it's all steel. And I'm telling you, it's old. And does it ever cut wood? It really cuts, and this stiff back saw too. He gave me and the little tri-square. Yeah, the other thing that I had here was about the natives. At one time out at the village, from the village, Fox Island is out across the lake quite a ways, and it's part of the reserve. And there was always, winter and summer, there was still always people over there. And if they just get this one guy, they went back and forth with smoke signals. And you've seen that in the movies, sure, I know you have. But this, one day, it was a bit windy, and the guy was sending up a signal from the island. And they thought, well, maybe he wants us to come over and pick him up in a boat or something. So everybody's standing there watching it, and oh yeah, the one come up, and another letter come up. I said, "What's it saying? What's he saying?" "Well," he said, "I don't know. The first letter is S, the next one is H, and the last one is T. Now, the wind blowing that, I don't know whether the center is I or O." And there used to be a wonderful old lad, sat at the end of the bridge in Burley, and he was there for years. And Hole in the Moccasin was his name. And at the time that he was sitting there, the Burley Hotel, the Park Hotel, was catered to Jews from the North Shore of New York State. And this one Jewish lad lad. His name was Haskell Hirschberger. Is that right? So, Haskell asked about the old lad sitting at the end of the bridge, and they said, well, he's been there for years, and he's got a memory like you, he just, you wouldn't believe the memory the old lad has. So he thought he'd go over and have some fun with them, and he went over, and he said, what'd you have for breakfast in 1921, June the 1st? He got eggs. Oh, what did you have for breakfast Christmas that year? Eggs. Everybody has eggs for breakfast. This is a folly. And the guy went back, and he went overseas during the war, and it was about 3 years before he come back. And he said, oh, by golly, the old lad's still sitting on the end of the bridge. So he thought he'd go over and pass some time with him. So he walked over, and how? He looked up at him and he said, scrambled. Oh, yeah. Charlie Armstrong, there's been quite a bit in the paper about Charlie Armstrong here lately. And one experience I heard over the years on Charlie, he was a little hard of hearing, and he was at a Legion meeting, and he was sitting beside another guy that was a little hard of hearing, Jack Mose. So finally Charlie says, who's that guy up there, Jack? The president of the Legion at that time. I won't tell you who he was. He's a local boy. And Jack didn't say anything. Who's that guy up there, Jack? He was getting louder all the time to get Jack to hear him. And Jack turned around and he said, Jack, told him who it was, and he said, oh, didn't recognize him, he must have had a bath. Yeah.
So getting back onto hockey for a minute, tell us about being inducted into the Sports Hall of Fame.
Well, it was quite a procedure in here. They really do it up good, and anybody here has never been in the Sports Hall of Fame. Go here, don't go to Toronto. It's all local, and these guys down there, they do a wonderful job. One of the Lakefield boys is the head honcho down there now, Donnie Wasson, and he wields a big stick, and they've got a beautiful and history and well documented everything, and it's clean and free. They might ask you for the change in your pocket or something when you're going to buy a ticket on the car draw that we have that supports it, and the tickets are just out, by the way. But I was really, for a few years I didn't give a darn whether I was in there or not, but after you're in there, well, it's a feeling of it. And it's also in 61 was inducted into the Belleville Hall of Fame over the winning of the Allen Cup. Is that it? Right. Oh, yeah, the old timers hockey team in Lakefield was great. We were the only team to keep your interest in everything. We'd have a fight on the bench, our own players would fight. That always stirred up something really good. I don't want anybody to be embarrassed, or I tell you who. I don't know whether he came tonight or not. But Jimmy Galvin. Jimmy Galvin, everybody knows Jimmy. Jimmy was born with stub, which the name is what he gets, is stub. And our coach was our spare goalie. And he might have to take his hat off, but he could walk underneath that table. And you'd think he was, at the voice, you'd think he was down cellar talking to you. If he wanted to see over the boards, he had to put one foot on the boards, up on the board like this, and the other foot back on the seat in the player's box. And Jimmy was playing defense, and somebody shot the puck out to the point guy, which was Jimmy, and he fumbled and missed it with the stick. And Steve says, "Keep both hands on your stick, Galvin."
So we know that hockey wasn't your only sport. Can you tell us a bit about some other sports you played?
I never really, only played baseball over in the park here for a couple of years. I never got into the baseball or lacrosse. I sold cars after I came back from junior hockey. General Motors got me a job with Duffus in Peterborough. And you don't sell cars in the summertime and play ball and lacrosse and everything too. Yeah. Fish, I like fishing and hunting. I never was a very good fisherman. I was a better liar than a fisherman. But hunting, I had the game, so I didn't need any more proof. They were hanging. When I started to work, one of the first winters, I got a job during the Christmas holidays, and it was with a mean boss. It was Barbara Leonard's, Barbara Heffernan, his father, Romeo Leonard, and you didn't sauce Romeo. He ducked going down that hall. Boy, he was a big man. And we cut ice right up in front of the Grove School, and the town had a big ice house in behind McManus's mill, and they filled it, and they filled several other along the lake. They sold ice and filled it. And we used to work, as kids, we worked on Saturdays for Jack Hendren, helping him pile wood, and he delivered wood to the welfare cases. He came to our house a couple of times, but we didn't have a furnace even, so we didn't need the wood. But he'd give you a cent a day for helping him. And he used to keep the pennies in a half a coconut with 4 little wired little chains on a hook in the kitchen. I can remember he could reach right up to the ceiling there, and he could pick them up, and he never picked out more than one. He could pick one out every time. He was really good, well trained. And I remember one time McManus's had, they had beautiful horses, always big horses. And probably it was John was coming up past the old ship and shore with the team. And the train was there, and I imagine the train blew the whistle, spooked the horses, and down they went. And the one horse got up, but the other horse got his feet in towards the pole, and he couldn't get up. He just couldn't get up. And Mickey, was coming up the railroad tracks, and he run up the pole in this room that would be bigger than Mickey, just a little guy. But he ran over there and he sat on that horse's head, and the horse never moved. After he sat on his head, the horse never moved. And I remember Jack got somebody to hold the other horse, and Jack got the harness all undone. By God, they got the harness up, or got the horse up, and away they went. Yeah. But he sat, I couldn't believe it, he sat on the horse's head to calm it. And when I worked at the Peterborough Canoe and went up to the boat livery at Juniper Island to work at Juniper Island, well, that was during the war, and there was nothing there. The only thing you rented was rowboats because nobody had gas for their for their outboards. And I used to go down to the Waukeeta here on Monday morning about 5 o'clock, get on the Waukeeta, go on up through, when they got out to Martha's Rock, and Mike Dean, you know where Martha's Rock is, don't you? Fished off it, and it scared the gulls away. And they blow the whistle on the thing, and Frank Gillespie, who was I worked for at the boat livery, would come out in the boat, and I'd jump down in the boat. Well, then Friday night, they always had a load coming back Friday night, and I'd get a ride back on Friday night. Frank would take me out, and I'd jump out. That was better than Fletcher's bus that was in town at that time. And I done little odd jobs for Wes Leonard at the hardware store in the corner where the Sun Shrine or something is there now. He had sold British American gas, BA gas, and I used to pump up the tanks when he'd put some in the cars. Boy, people used to buy 2 gallons at a time then, you know, not 2 liters, 2 gallons. And at 23 cents a gallon, you could hardly afford it. But Wes would take me up to his cottage at the 4 E's on the weekends sometimes. And the 4 E's were E, 4 E's. And later years, Jackie, my wife, owned that place. We didn't have the E's up there. We put the E's back up when we got up there. But I remember we put all new windows in the front of the old house, and I told Rick Pearson, who was doing it, I said, boy, be careful because that wall's going to fall down. I said, there's a door there. Oh, no, there's no door there. There was a door there, and the wall fell down. Down she come, tumbling. Boy, and Wes, when he'd take me up to the island, or up to the cottage, we'd go on the islinda, and we'd get on the islinda down here at the dock and ride up, and you couldn't get in. It was shallow, too shallow there, and they put the plank out and walk, and I can remember Wes handing Pat Young the quarter for the trip. Of course, it didn't cost anything for fuel for the islinda because they used to get it from McManus's mill. When the boys would go home for dinner, they'd get the wheelbarrow and wheel it up with slabs. I worked for Gaffney Construction for about 12 years, worked on several jobs around here. The bridge at Healy Falls, and I remember when I was on that bridge at Healy Falls, when we were building it, and that all come back to me here a couple of weeks ago when that bridge collapsed, the one here just a couple of weeks ago. I was down there the day that thing collapsed and saw those poor lads. Didn't see the last 2. They never saw them until they got them out of the cement after. But I had the snack bar over there across the bridge, and I had lots of could go on forever about things that happened over there. But there, Moosey Murdoch, John, Doug Shepard, who was killed in working for the Telegram, and he was doing an interview, and the plane crashed up in the Arctic someplace there a few years. And Bev Frost, who worked for the Department of Education, I think, out of Peter, he was the man that looked after the routing of all the school buses. One day they decided they were going to skip school. So they skipped school with it, Big Joe, when they skipped. But then they got wondering, well, they weren't going to get a note from home. All they were going to get was hell, as they found out there. So they come to me and asked me if I'd write them a note. I said, well, certainly, lads. I know how you feel about it all and everything. I'll write you notes. So I wrote the note to Everett Sloan, put it in an envelope. Dear Everett, I caught these lads skipping school yesterday, and I put them to work, and they worked like little angels for me there all day. And, Everett Sloan, isn't he a good lad? Yes, sir, he's a real good lad. But that's the only good thing that Everett, I think, ever said to me. I pretty near got, when you wrote your entrance in those days, you used to have to write a lesson, an exam. And I was so close to going out on recommendation. Everett said, it'll do you really good to write the exams. He said, you'll appreciate it after. I failed. And I appreciated it after because I went down for the mail twice a week, painted the white lines out on the football field, and in the wintertime, 3 or 4 times a day, you'd have to go down and check the ice at the arena to see if there was going to be free skating that night. Yeah. Everett Sloan was a real teacher's teacher. He was a real and a gentleman. He could sit down and talk to you after school, and he was an awful nice man. I'm only saying that because he's got relatives here. I have 2 sons, and that's not really, I've had 3 wives. So I'm better on the wives than I am with the reproduction. They're both out west. One is in Calgary and the other one is in Olds, Alberta. John works for a contractor there. He's the final guy that goes through the house with you when they sell it, and you point out all the faults that have to be fixed. He's the guy that does that. And Paul is in real estate, and he builds a house now and then and sells it. He was in the car business out there for years. Oh, I missed the page. And we don't want to miss it until we start leaving. Oh yeah, all right.
You've mentioned some other interesting facts about Lakefield and the fact that you can remember there have been 6 dairies in Lakefield.
6 dairies. 6 dairies. Kemp's Dairy. Herb Kemp lived right at the end of the road, and just when you went onto the highway going down the hill into the left, his farm was in there. Jack Blakely's farm was up in behind the fairgrounds. And Glenwood Farms was up on Queen Street, just going out of town there. And the Lakefield Dairy was where the bank, or where post office is now. And there used to be a service station in there as well. Don Lloyd had a service station in there. And Erskine's, I think they run it from the house too, and it was the big white brick house up in the school that was just the beautiful reconstruction done on it here last year. And Percy Darling had one in his house right down in the corner of Regent and Albert. He worked right out of the house. But these guys, once they started pasteurizing, some of them got out. They just didn't have room to develop it. So Lakefield Dairy and Glenwood. And Percy Darling hung in there for a while. And you want me to?
I want you to tell about this.
Oh, this is a snack bar. Yeah.
You may not know that I know about the time that you saved a man from drowning when you had the snack bar by the bridge. Could you tell us about that?
One of the local boys was in there that morning. It was early. When I say early, it was a Sunday morning, and I think I opened about 7 o'clock or 7:30. But Miles Huddlestone was in there talking, and this little kid run in, about 10 years old, and said his dad was going over the dam in his boat. And what? So we looked out the back window, and sure enough, here's the boat coming down. And he had bought a boat and motor And whether the motor had gas or he knew how to start it or what, but he had a problem. He was going over the dam, there was no kidding about it. So Miles and I run over to Foster's garage and run down in behind Foster's garage, in between the bridges, and it was in April. I can remember the icicles hanging on the red willow gads in there. And we walked out, and the boat went down where the cement pier is, down through the center. And I said, I'm not going over there. That's where the chapel boy, that's how he drowned someone across there. And there's no way he was going over. And by God, he came up right in front of me. And I grabbed him and pulled him in, got him into the shore, and by that time the big siren on the top of the town hall was going. That's how they got the firemen. And boy, they got a good response with the firemen. And they got him out. And his name was Schmidt. And I never got a thank you from him, nothing. He never acknowledged it. But years later, we were playing in a tournament down in Ottawa, and his daughter came over and she said, you don't know me, but you saved my father, and told me and thanked me. And she was married to one of the hockey players on the other team. One time I saw him hanging over the bridge there, looking down over the bridge, and I told him, I said, don't fall in, because I'm not going to save you again. Now listen, there's an elephant buried here someplace in town. Yeah. I told him about the drownings. I jumped on you.
You know we've been waiting to hear about the important question. Please tell us where the elephant is buried in Lakefield.
Well, an old fellow told me in the 40s, and he was well up in his 90s when he told me, and he was a real old, honest man. He lived right beside me. He lived in the house where Bill Sheets lives up there now. And he told me about the elephant. And I do believe him, because a guy told me years later that he said he was so honest that when he used to paint houses, and he said that he never even took the empty cans home. He's left them right there for you. He was so honest after he painted. I don't know, maybe that's not true. But they had a circus, and the circus come into town on the train, and they had a big parade over with the calliope and the whole bit over to the fairgrounds. And during the circus, the elephant died. Well, they just walked away from it. So what are they going to do with the dead elephant? Teddy Crawford couldn't butcher it in the butcher shop there. They weren't much called for elephant steaks at the time. And they couldn't find anything that could move the elephant. So in this Peterborough hospital, where it is up there now, is there lives Stocks. And Stocks own the bakery in Peterborough, Stocks Bakery, and they used to deliver with horse and cart. And they went down to get them, and they come up with some horses, and they dragged it down to where the hospital is, and they got it down beside the building there, and they didn't know what they were going to do with it. So they dug this big hole, buried the elephant, put the dirt all back in, and that's where that flower bed is, in front of the hospital. Now we lived there. Our yard backed right over into their lane, and all those houses up that street were in there. They bought all the back end of those lots to put the parking lot in at St. Paul's School. So, and that's where the elephant's buried, believe it or not. But that's the best story I've heard yet. But a friend of Neil Wasson's was within a couple of 100 yards of that, wasn't it?
far as I know.
He's not gonna get involved either.
Well, I saw the trunk.
Yeah. Well, they shipped the trunk back from the station.
It was sitting on the CNR station on the dock over there.
Then Water Yale looked after it. And Jackie and I traveled, and we didn't mind, never minded winters, and we couldn't afford to go really to Florida, and neither one of us liked it, but we made a trip. Our last trip to the States was to Charleston, to see the Charleston and Fort Sumter, and we went over and visited a couple of old hockey players over at Panama City, and then we moved on to Tombstone, and finally we ended up at Death Valley. Death Valley is something else. We stayed there. Scotty's Castle. If you go to Death Valley, when you're going in from the north end, you go by Scotty's Castle, and he was quite a man, this old Scotty. He didn't own the castle, but some minister owned it, and he took Scotty on, and he was just wonderful friends with him. And Scotty was in the original show with Buffalo Bill. Scotty, I forget what his name was in there, but he lived right there. We went into the castle and took a look, and on every door there was a hole cut in the wall, right just about the doorknob, but this was in the wall, and on the outside there was a cup, and the cup was curled to over in front of the door, and that was when they shot with the shotgun, they'd shoot into that, and the shot would go over and kill whoever was standing in front of the door. Good thinking, eh? I don't know whether they ever used it or not, but it was there. And we really enjoyed Arizona. One thing about Arizona, they told me that when you get 8 inches of rain in Arizona, that means that the drops of rain are 8 inches apart. And we went to Alaska, and my brother-in-law told me, he said it was 10,300 miles, the trip around. He was about 300 miles out. We went 300 miles more than he did. I had a little tent, crank-up trailer, little canvas one, and I went to sleep. The rhythm of that thing at night would go to sleep, and that was Jackie shaking for a case of beer coming. But that was really a trip. It wore a set of tires right off that little trailer. Yeah, and Dawson City. It's amazing. You read. I'll tell you, read Pierre Burton's book, and Mister, he can tell you more about it because, of course, he lived in Dawson City. And what was the old guy's name that lived next door to you? In the old house, Ogilvy, Bill Ogilvy. He's mentioned in Pierre's books quite often. And this is old Bill Ogilvy, and he was a surveyor, and he surveyed all the big strikes that were ever up there, and he never once staked a claim for himself. Never once did he ever claim. Something, a funny little thing I gotta tell you too, it just hit me. There'll be a lot of things hit me tomorrow. Celia Jacobs. I don't know whether you know Celia. When I had the snack bar, about every second day, Celia would be in, and she'd have 2 5-cent pop bottles, and she'd be standing right in front of the penny candy, and spend the whole dime, right on the penny candy, right, just cold cash, right there. And took Took her a long time though to make up her mind what she wanted. And you didn't get the bottles until she had made up her mind what she wanted. And there were 3 goons, brothers, sat at the corner of the table as soon as they'd see her come in there at the counter. There's only 2 of them here tonight. And they'd be, when I turned my back, telling her to get the candy and fill her pockets and get out. I got a little rough with her this one morning, and I was busy, and I was getting pretty short maybe. But we made the deal anyway, and away she went. But the next morning, the snack bar over there, the windows were hinged, and they came out in the summertime, and you could hook them up on the overhang of the roof there, and they have the screens. And the next morning after that little episode where I scolded her, I see this pretty little face looking through the screen. Pale face Montgomery, pale face Montgomery. Oh, she was a cutie. And if you don't be afraid to go over to the extended care, because I think she's still working there. Is she over there, Elmer? Yeah? She's still there. Yeah, see, I never forget it. And funny, she bought the house that we lived in. She owned the house the last time. Fix it all up there. And is that it? Oh, you have one more. Oh, yeah, all right.
Before we wrap
Don't
up,
embarrass
Keith, I won't. Tell us who you would consider ambassadors for Lakefield and why.
Well, that's not really hard. It's not really hard. How many do you want? To give you 2. Okay, I got 2 picked here anyway. The one, you wouldn't think maybe he should be unless you were in the hospital or down at the Legion or over at the extended care or knew him like I know him. It's Elmer Graham. He does a lot of I think the backer is right behind him or beside him. Yeah. And Nick does a lot of work. He does a lot of work that you see in the paper, and he does a lot under the covers that you don't see. And I never was a fan of Nick. He gave me a scalding one time just on one prescription, but I was teased off for quite a few years. But I go back to him now, and I use the day clinic which he provides. So I would have to say Elmer Graham and Nick Lalami. Before I leave, I've got one more poem of Tom Junkin. Now these poems, that first one has been greatly edited. This one didn't need much, and the third one I have at home, the girls were too busy to go through it too. But this one was pretty good too. The Installation of the Northern Lights, or How Rural Can You Get, written by Tom Junkin, Lakefield, in regard to the Ontario Hydro office in Lakefield. They were sitting around in Lakefield town without a call to service, when up speaks Rod and says, "By gar, this waiting makes me nervous. I'll tell you chaps, I've got the maps for a job that should be done. We'll all go forth to the frozen north and compete with the midnight sun. Now Bill and Jack, get your gangs packed. If you blunder now, you've had her. Tell all the men we leave at 10, and don't forget the dad-burned ladder. Oh, you should have seen the convoy when they lined up with their gear. Hannah Craig carried the banner, and Dot brought up the rear. Ronnie checked the stores truck, and he said to Paul Revere, have you got enough extension cord to reach from here to there? Sir Percy said, oh mercy, if you want to know the truth, I plan on getting all my supplies at the wine store in Maynooth. They drove for days, straight north always, 2,000 miles or so. And cold were they as they mushed their way through 20 feet of snow. The coyotes howled and the bears growled at the face of the man in the moon. And Fairman said to Sutton, "My goodness, I wish it was my May or June." Oh, that's the weather he's talking about. Then over the snow came the Eskimo, and they looked both mean and wicked. But fearless Bevan said, "Good heavens, I'll give them a Legion ticket." At last they came to the top of the world, tired, hungry, and cold. But they hung the first transformer on the famous North Pole. And that is why, in the northern sky, the heaven looks so pleasant. The hydro guys aren't telling you lies. They installed it all fluorescent. Oh, I gotta thank you for being such a good, understanding audience. I didn't think I'd enjoy this, but I enjoy lying. Telling the odd little fib the odd time, stretching the truth, but I didn't tonight. Anything that I was told in sincere honesty, that I repeated it. And I want to thank this young girl for helping me, and her sister, and I think her mother had she drove them to it anyway. She's a matriarch, let me tell you. Thank you very much for coming.
Mr. Montgomery, it has been our pleasure to hear you and laugh with you about this marvelous village and the characters who have lived here. Some of us not so very long, only since 1947.
Yeah, that was the year of the big race.
That was the year that my family moved to Young's Point.
Was it?
I was 13. Anyway, you've been here a little bit longer than that.
Yeah.
And your memory is very, very good.
Well, I thought it was good till I talked to my mother, and she died at 96, and she never forgot nothing. Never forgot nothing. But her favorite saying was,